You ever had one of those mornings that just didn't sit right in your bones? The kind where the air feels too still, like it's waiting for something to go sideways? Well, that Saturday started like any other quiet day on my patch of land. Just me, my coffee, and the kind of silence that men my age learn to treasure more than gold. I'm pushing 67. Spent most of my life figuring out how not to let the world get under my skin. And I thought I'd succeeded. Until the damn brass band came blaring through my bedroom window at 6 in the morning like the ghost of Mardi Gras had taken a wrong turn. At first, I figured maybe it was just my hearing playing tricks again. A leftover echo from an old war movie I fell asleep to the night before. Happens, you know? The kind of dream that bleeds into morning, where you're not quite sure if you're in your bed or a trench in Nam. But this wasn't a dream. This was real. Real as the dust on my porch swing and the ache in my left knee. Then came the microphone feedback, sharp, high-pitched, slicing the calm in two, and some woman's voice shouting about pies and linen placements like we were hosting the county fair. Now, I've seen a lot of strange things in my life, but nothing quite prepares you for a full-scale wedding being erected on your lawn without so much as a knock on the door. I dragged myself to the window, rubbed my eyes, and there it was. Rows of white folding chairs laid out with military precision. A flower-covered archway, crooked but ambitious, planted right next to my fishing pond. Tents lined up like they were waiting for inspection. And people, dozens of them, strangers, laughing, shouting, dragging tables around like they owned the place. One of them even had the audacity to wave at me. And here's the part that still makes my blood simmer. They looked comfortable. Like this wasn't trespassing, but a planned destination. Like I'd rolled out the damn red carpet and said, "Sure, come stomp your muddy shoes across my land and rearrange it to your liking." That's the part that sticks, isn't it? The assumption, the entitlement, the belief that because it's quiet and pretty, and because the owner isn't in their face barking orders, it must be free for the taking. I own 12 acres just outside of town, surrounded by trees thick enough to muffle the world. I worked my entire life to earn this space. Retired military, a couple decades in maintenance and logistics, paid off every inch of this place with my hands and back. I don't live here to entertain. I don't host barbecues or garden parties. The only things welcome on this land are birds, wind, and the occasional helicopter that lands as part of my lease deal with a tourism company. That's right, helicopters. I rent out the back 3 acres for training flights and scenic rides. FAA designated. Scheduled every Saturday. Like clockwork. So when I stomped out there, barefoot in my old college sweatshirt and pajama pants, dew soaking through the soles, I wasn't just confused. I was damn near offended. And maybe that's something younger folks don't understand these days. Property isn't just grass and dirt. The sweat. It's years. It's every busted knuckle and late night spent fixing a fence or unclogging a septic line. It's respect. And when a person decides to set up a wedding on your land without asking, that's not just rude. That's war. The woman in the silk robe turned to me with a smile so sweet it could rot teeth. "Oh, good, you're here," she chirped, like I was the help showing up late. I don't think she realized I was the landowner yet. "Don't worry. We'll clean everything up after the ceremony." I stopped walking. Right there in the middle of my lawn. My jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" I asked. "Who are you and what the hell are you doing on my land?" She blinked, confused, as if my question didn't compute. "I'm Karen," she said, as if that explained everything. "I'm the bride. This is our wedding venue." I looked around again. No hidden cameras. No pranksters crouching behind tents ready to yell surprise. Just her and an army of entitled guests taking over 3 acres like it was a picnic in a public park. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. A short, bitter sound. "You're what?" I asked. Karen tilted her head like a confused golden retriever. "Our planner said this field was community-used land. You weren't using it, so we figured it wouldn't be a big deal. You ever felt your heart rate jump not from fear but from fury so pure it makes your hands shake? That's what hit me then. The way she dismissed the notion of ownership. The way she reduced my home, to an abandoned plot of grass. It wasn't just disrespect. It was delusion dressed up in white lace and arrogance. A man walked past with a tray of shrimp cocktail. Another adjusted the wedding arch. A few groomsmen tossed a hacky sack dangerously close to my tool shed. Laughing like this was their uncle's backyard. "You didn't get permission to be here," I said flatly. "This is private property." Karen's tone hardened. "Well, we're already set up and guests are arriving. It would be a shame to ruin my big day over a little patch of grass." A little patch of grass. 3 acres. FAA cleared airspace. Helicopter landing zone. Booked solid every Saturday. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, I heard it. The low, rhythmic thump in the distance. Faint at first, then building. The familiar sound of rotors cutting through morning air. Oh no. Oh yes. Right on schedule. You know what I did? Nothing. I stepped back onto the porch, folded my arms, and waited. Now, I'm not a cruel man. I've seen hardship. I know when to extend grace. But I also know when a line's been crossed. This wasn't about a wedding. This was about boundaries. And something deep in me, the old soldier maybe, or just the man who'd been overlooked one too many times, stood firm. The Bell 407 helicopter came into view, low and fast. Guests looked up, confused. Karen turned and screamed. The tents flapped violently. Hairpieces flew. The archway tilted. People ran like someone had pulled the fire alarm. Tablecloths whipped into the air. A bridesmaid skidded across the field, missing her shoe. And I just sipped my coffee. The pilot hovered, then touched down gently right in the middle of what had been their makeshift dance floor. Karen screamed up at the cockpit, demanding the helicopter leave. But I'd signed the lease, not her. That helicopter had more right to be there than her entire wedding party combined. Karen stormed up to the porch, veil tangled around her like a flag of surrender. "You have to make them stop," she shouted. "I can't," I said, calm as a monk. "They pay for this space. You don't." Her mouth opened, ready for another tantrum, but instead she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she threatened. "Fantastic," I replied. "Let's clear this up legally." 10 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy rolled up. I handed him my paperwork, FAA permits, lease agreements, even the flight schedule. Karen, meanwhile, had nothing but a shaky story and the word of a wedding planner who clearly hadn't done her homework. The deputy looked at her, then back at me. "Ma'am, this is trespassing. You can't just show up on someone's land and host a wedding because it looks nice." And here's the thing. She didn't cry because she was sorry. She cried because she didn't get her way. Because the world, for once, didn't bend to her will. So, dear reader, especially if you're like me, a man who's worked hard, values peace, and refuses to be pushed around, here's what I'll tell you. You don't need to raise your voice to reclaim your space. You just need to stand still and let the truth make the noise. Mine came with rotor blades, and it was glorious. That was just the beginning. But sometimes the beginning tells you everything you need to know about how far someone's willing to go, and how far you're willing to let them. So ask yourself this. What would you have done, barefoot on that lawn, with your morning coffee cooling and a wedding crashing down around you? Because I didn't invite war that day, but I sure as hell finished it. I don't know if you've ever watched a wedding unravel in real time, but let me tell you, it's a strange kind of beautiful. There's something oddly satisfying about watching the world of someone who's used to getting their way come undone at the seams, especially when that world was built on your lawn without permission. Now, I hadn't planned to make a scene. I'm not the type. But once that first helicopter dropped in and turned their table arrangements into airborne debris, I realized something. I didn't need to fight. Nature was fighting for me. The truth had a propeller and a schedule to keep. The guests scattered like leaves in a wind tunnel. Champagne glasses shattered, dresses snagged on tent poles, and one poor guy lost his toupee to the updraft. I caught it midair. Reflexes honed from years of baseball in my youth, and calmly handed it back to him without a word. He nodded, muttered something about wrong address, and disappeared into a crowd that was already beginning to resemble the aftermath of a 4th of July picnic gone wrong. You could feel the shift then, like the air had changed. The fantasy was cracking. Karen, bride, invader, human hurricane, was not pleased. She stomped across the field, barking orders with mascara streaked like war paint down her cheeks. At one point, she tried to stabilize a gift table herself, only for it to collapse under a tower of Tiffany blue boxes. Guests started arguing. The DJ pulled his hoodie over his head and took refuge behind a catering truck, puffing a cigarette like he was back in high school detention. And then she turned to me again. "You've made your point?" she spat, voice shaking not with fear but fury. The kind that bubbles up when the world dares to say no. "Can you please stop ruining my wedding?" She didn't ask. She demanded, like I was the help who forgot to refill the mimosas. I took a long sip of coffee. "Karen," I said slowly, like explaining to a stubborn dog why it can't chew the same damn slipper every day. "I didn't ruin anything. You did that the moment you trespassed onto land you didn't own and called it yours." Before she could reply, her fiancé emerged from the chaos, hands half raised like he was approaching a wild animal. He hadn't said a word up until this point, probably still processing the fact that his wedding now included air traffic. "Look," he said, quiet and measured. "We didn't know." I thought she cleared it. There was sincerity in his eyes, or at least enough exhaustion to make it look like sincerity. I gave him credit for that, but it didn't matter. I laid it out for him. The land was under contract. For more helicopters were scheduled to arrive, spaced evenly through the afternoon. Canceling wasn't an option. It would break FAA protocol and cost me thousands. And even if I could stop them, I wouldn't. I wasn't about to reward trespassing with silence. Not today. He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the remains of what was once a dance floor. Guests were beginning to gather around the edges of the field now, like survivors of a natural disaster waiting for the Red Cross. One little boy was still clutching a squashed cupcake like it was the last piece of civilization left. You could feel the morale breaking. Then, just as the silence started to settle, came the second chopper. This one was louder, flying lower, banking in with a kind of cinematic flair that made it look like the opening scene of a war movie. The downwash sent a burst of dust across the field, flipping over what few tablecloths had managed to hang on after round one. A pair of high heels tumbled across the grass like tumbleweeds. People screamed again. A folding chair took flight and nearly took out a balloon arch that had somehow survived the first round. And Karen? Karen stood frozen, veil wrapped around one leg, hair matted with sweat and wilted rose petals. She looked like the ghost of a party that never was. Then she did something that surprised even me. She picked up a plate of hors d'oeuvres and hurled it toward the helicopter. Didn't come close, but the gesture? The gesture said everything. The pilot, unfazed, completed the landing and calmly waved to the nearest guest. The man looked around like he needed permission to move, then jogged over and climbed aboard like he was catching an Uber out of hell. That gave me an idea. I called the helicopter company's manager, told him what was happening. He laughed so hard he dropped his radio. Said his pilots had already been relaying updates over comms and were having the time of their lives. One even offered to let a guest ride along, which the guest eagerly accepted just to get away from the disaster zone. "Can we offer short joy rides to the other guests?" I asked. "Free of charge. On one condition, they leave the property immediately after." "Hell yes," the manager replied. "Best PR we've had in years." So I stepped forward and made the announcement. Anyone who wanted a helicopter ride was welcome to one. But once they landed, they were to exit the premises. No lingering, no returning. Clean getaway. You'd be amazed how quickly the tone changed. Hands shot up. Grown adults elbowed their way to the front like it was Black Friday at a helicopter dealership. Even the flower girl handed off her basket and lined up, determined not to miss out. Karen shrieked like someone had stabbed her ego with a salad fork. "No one is leaving my wedding for a helicopter ride," she screamed, voice cracking under the weight of her own disbelief. But they didn't listen. Because here's the truth. People will put up with a lot. Heat, bad music, overcooked shrimp. But once you offer them a way out of discomfort, they'll run. And that's exactly what they did. One by one, guests climbed aboard and took off. They waved down at Karen like passengers waving goodbye to the Titanic. Even the DJ bailed, turning off his soundboard and catching the last ride of the second chopper. Karen stood alone in the field, her dress now resembling a deflated parachute. Mascara streaked like a football player's wore paint after a loss. I almost pitied her. Almost. Then came the wedding planner. She approached quietly, clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. Her eyes darted around, as if expecting to be tackled. "I just want to say, I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't know the land wasn't cleared. She told me it was." "Got it in writing?" I asked. She nodded, trembling, and handed me her clipboard. On it were messages from Karen confirming she hadn't received permission but planned to deal with the owner later. I took a photo of every page. That would come in handy. Just then, the third helicopter arrived, and with it, another storm of wind and chaos. Karen, who had taken to pacing like a tiger in a too-small cage, looked up and screamed again. This time, she picked up her bouquet and flung it into the air like a Hail Mary. It fluttered, twisted, and landed in the pond with a sad little splash. That's when the sheriff returned. One look at the scene. Torn tents, flattened grass, airborne shrimp cocktail, and his jaw tightened. He walked straight to Karen and issued a citation for interfering with an aircraft. She howled, said she'd sue me for emotional damages, that she'd make sure I never slept peacefully again. But no one was listening anymore. Her audience was gone. Her wedding had dissolved into a punchline with rotor blades. I stood back, hands in my pockets, watching the last of the helicopters lift off. The air finally began to settle. Dust hung low like a final curtain call. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired, but also oddly satisfied, because sometimes justice doesn't need sirens or gavels. Sometimes it just shows up on time with a full tank of fuel. And in that moment, standing on the porch with my coffee, watching a field once invaded now cleared by wind and timing, I realized something. This wasn't the end of a wedding. This was the beginning of a reckoning. And I wasn't going anywhere. I thought, after 3 helicopters and enough dust to choke a tractor, that maybe, just maybe, Karen would finally get the message. You know, sometimes it takes a gust of wind or a few 100,000 RPMs to blow some sense into people. But this wasn't one of those times. Some folks, especially the loud, lace-wrapped variety, seem immune to reality. It's like trying to argue with a hornet. You're never going to win, and you're definitely going to get stung trying. I just finished rinsing off my porch steps, coated in a thin layer of frosting and confetti when the third chopper came through, when the doorbell rang. I don't get visitors. I've lived long enough and far enough from town to make sure of that. But this ring wasn't neighborly. It was frantic. On the other side of the door stood one of the groomsmen, shirt untucked, tie loosened, hair like he'd gone through a wind tunnel, which technically he had. He looked sheepish, like a man confessing a sin he didn't quite regret. "She's calling the cops again," he said, shifting from foot to foot. "Says the helicopters are committing airspace aggression?" I blinked. "Airspace aggression?" I repeated. "What does that even mean?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But she's on the phone with someone. Says she's escalating it." "Let her escalate," I replied, closing the door gently in his face. I knew how this game worked. I've seen it play out in town hall meetings, in HOA showdowns, even back in the service when a captain's daughter didn't get the dorm room she wanted, and suddenly the whole base had to reevaluate its bunk policy. Entitlement isn't about logic. It's about volume. Karen wasn't losing. She was being wronged. In her mind, this wasn't an illegal wedding on private land. No, it was a targeted attack. A man with a porch swing and a coffee cup had dared to ruin her special day. And now she was gearing up for battle. Sure enough, 10 minutes later I heard shouting. I stepped outside and saw Karen, cell phone clenched in her fist like a weapon, stomping in a circle near the shattered wedding arch. She was screaming into the phone, demanding emergency action against hostile aircraft interference. The absurdity of it all would have been funny if it wasn't so damn real. And then, just as she was mid-rant, another guest quietly slipped away and jogged toward me. He was older, probably close to my age, and had the look of a man who'd seen enough weddings to know when to fold. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "Just wanted to thank you." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "The ride," he said with a smile. "I haven't been in the air in 40 years. That chopper ride made me feel like a kid again." Then he pulled a folded note from his jacket. Inside was a crisp check and a handwritten thank you. I didn't ask for it, didn't expect it, but that's the thing about dignity. Some people still carry it around, even when the world's caught in a whirlwind of cupcakes and chaos. I thanked him, tucked the letter into my pocket, and watched as he climbed into a dusty sedan and drove off, one of the few to leave with something good from the day. Meanwhile, Karen's spiral had only just begun. The wedding planner, poor girl, looked like she'd aged a decade, was now being chewed out publicly in front of a dwindling crowd. Karen was waving her arms, shouting accusations, and even started grabbing centerpieces to make some kind of visual point. But the wind kept blowing her hair in her face and ruining the effect. The planner, for her part, stood her ground and eventually held up her phone. I couldn't hear her words, but I could read the look on her face. She had receipts. And from the way Karen's face turned 3 different shades of rage, those receipts probably weren't flattering. That's when the drone arrived. See, earlier in the day, some bright soul had hired a drone operator to film the wedding. One of those young guys with a truck full of gadgets and a license that meant he thought he knew everything about everything. He'd taken cover when the wind kicked up, but apparently forgot to shut off his drone. Which meant, somewhere in the sky, a high-definition recording of every moment. From the first unauthorized table setup to the moment Karen tried to throw a bouquet at a moving aircraft, was quietly compiling the most unintentional viral video ever created. And sure enough, within the hour, someone found the footage, posted it online, and lit the fuse. I didn't find out until that evening, when my niece called me laughing so hard she could barely breathe. "Uncle Joe, you're on TikTok." "What the hell is TikTok?" I asked. "It's like YouTube but with less patience," she said. "There's a video of a wedding disaster with helicopters. People are calling it Bridezilla versus Air Force One." I sat down in my recliner and let that sink in. Part of me wanted to be mad. My land, my peace, my Saturday, but another part couldn't stop smiling. Because finally the truth had wings. The video went everywhere. Commentators dissected it like a Super Bowl replay. Slow-motion shots of chairs tumbling, captions pointing out the no trespassing sign Karen's team had covered in roses. Frame-by-frame analysis of the moment she lost her mind and tried to reason with a spinning rotor. The internet did what it does best. It turned a tantrum into theater. Karen, meanwhile, disappeared, deleted her social accounts, ghosted the vendors. The DJ posted a video claiming he never got paid. The caterer uploaded screenshots of texts from Karen promising post-wedding transfers that never came. Even the florist chimed in, saying she wanted her stands back or cash equivalent. It was a digital reckoning. A chorus of professionals, each burned by the same woman who thought charm could override contracts. Then came the letter. Not from Karen, but from a law firm with a name that sounded like it had been pulled from a soap opera. Prescott and Wainwright. It accused me of emotional sabotage, marital interference, and, my personal favorite, negligent aviation behavior. They wanted an apology, financial restitution, and an agreement to cease all helicopter operations on my land. I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. I sent the whole mess to my friend Amy, who also happens to be the sharpest lawyer I know. Her response? A 10-word text. "Do I get to wear my court slayer heels?" Within 48 hours, she sent a countersuit draft so thorough and so delightfully brutal that Prescott and Wainwright backed off faster than a squirrel from a lawnmower. I heard nothing more after that. Not a whisper. But the world hadn't forgotten. If anything, the legend was growing. News stations called. Podcast wanted an interview. Even a tourism magazine reached out to do a feature on the most dramatic helicopter landing in wedding history. I declined the flashy stuff. But I said yes to one thing. A short segment for the local news under one condition. I'd tell the story exactly as it happened, no sugarcoating. And I did. We filmed it on the porch. The sign in the background. The field behind me, quiet now, the chaos long gone. When it aired, the phone rang off the hook for days. But not with complaints. With thank yous. With laughter. With people telling me I'd reminded them what standing your ground looked like. And that's what stuck with me. Not the cake in the grass or the ruined linen. But that people saw what I saw. A moment when lines got crossed and someone said, "No more." Sometimes that's all it takes. One man, one field, one line in the dirt. And the wind does the rest. You'd think after a week of viral videos, internet chaos, and a lawyer showdown that things would cool down. That maybe the dust would settle, literally, and I could go back to my Saturdays with a cup of black coffee and the sound of rotors thumping in the distance like a metronome of peace. But no, because people, especially people like Karen, don't know how to quit. They don't know how to lose. They double down, even when they're buried in receipts and the whole country's pointing and laughing. 2 weeks after what the media had started calling the helicopter wedding debacle, I received a certified letter, pink envelope, glitter ink, and all. I should have burned it. But curiosity's a hell of a drug. Inside, in the most lawyered up, delusional prose I'd ever seen, was a new demand. Not from Karen directly, of course. She had a new firm representing her now. Probably some cousin's boyfriend who passed the bar in a basement. They were threatening to sue me again for malicious interruption of sacred ceremony, airborne hostility, and, I kid you not, unlawful use of meteorological conditions. I read that sentence twice. Apparently, I had conspired with the wind to ruin her day. Now I'm no scientist, but even in my 60s I know better than to argue with Mother Nature. Still, I scanned it, forwarded it to Amy, and braced myself. Her response came in 5 minutes flat. She was furious. Not because they had a case, God no, but because she hated seeing the legal system twisted into a vanity project. "We're countering," she said. Again. This time, our packet included itemized damages. Cost of delayed flights, cleanup crew fees, lost revenue from a private landing tour, and emotional harassment. We also included a statement from the FAA acknowledging that Karen's actions had disrupted approved flight operations. That shut them up. 3 days later, her new law firm ghosted. Just like the first. But the world hadn't moved on. Not yet. The video kept climbing in views. More angles surfaced. Someone posted drone footage synced with the DJ's audio. So Karen's meltdown played over a bass drop. One guy edited the whole thing into a mock movie trailer. Helicopter wedding. Love is in the air. Literally. It was stupid but also genius. And then the local press circled back for a follow-up. They wanted to know how life had changed. The truth was, everything had shifted. My field, just grass and dirt a month ago, had become a tourist destination. Strangers pulled up on Saturdays asking to take selfies next to the landing zone. One guy came in full tuxedo. A woman brought a bouquet and reenacted the windstorm in slow motion. Someone even tried to rent the spot for their proposal. I said yes, with one condition: no lace, no lies, and definitely no Karens. Word got out, and the whole thing snowballed. The helicopter company leaned into it, created a special ride package called the Bridal Gus Tour. Passengers could toss fake bouquets mid-flight and take home mini rotor keychains. Every flight included a quick recap of the incident, narrated by whichever pilot had lived through the original storm. Couldn't believe it. My land, once a quiet field no one cared about, was now listed in a tourism blog under Top 5 Most Unforgettable Airborne Experiences. And I got a cut. Not much, but enough to fix the sagging porch roof and donate to the local fire department's new radio system. I didn't brag, didn't post, just wrote a quiet check and mailed it off. But the town noticed. One evening, I got a knock on the door. A handful of local shop owners stood there with a laminated certificate they'd made themselves. Air Traffic Controller of Chaos and Community. They spelled my last name wrong, but I didn't care. I hung it in the shed next to the fuel ledger. But even that wasn't the end of it. One morning, as the sun was cutting through a thin mist and the blades of the first chopper whispered across the treetops, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A modest rental car. Out-of-state plates. A woman stepped out. I recognized her immediately. Karen's mother. She walked up slowly, like a soldier returning to a battlefield. Perfect hair, designer bag, but tired eyes. "May I speak with you?" she asked. I nodded and led her to the porch steps. We sat there in silence for a while, the wind nudging leaves across the floorboards like confessions. She didn't come to argue, didn't come to plead. She came to apologize, not for Karen, but for herself. "I believed her," she said finally. "Thought it was just a misunderstanding. But I saw the footage. I saw myself. I didn't like what I saw." Turns out she'd been the one screaming at vendors, using my hose without permission, directing guests like she owned the place. I grew up thinking if you acted confident enough, you could control anything. I see now I was wrong. I didn't say much, just listened. She didn't ask for forgiveness and I didn't offer it. But we shook hands. That was enough. As she drove away, I realized something else. This wasn't just about a ruined wedding. It was about boundaries, about how, sometimes, standing your ground isn't about shouting, it's about being still, and letting the madness break against you like waves on stone. The story wasn't dying down either. 1 week later, an A-list actor, someone I'd only seen in movies about space wars and talking animals, shared the viral video with the caption, "If I ever get married again, it's happening here." That post blew the whole thing up again. We got more tourists, more press, even a podcast interview. I kept my tone steady, my words clear. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just tired of watching people think the world owed them a stage. And now, finally, the world was watching back. They saw what happened when ego met air traffic, when lies hit propeller blades, and when a man with a porch swing and some paperwork said, "No, not on my land." The fourth helicopter came in right on time that Saturday. The wind stirred the grass. The sign at the property line, freshly carved, read, "No trespassing. Helicopters welcome. Weddings not recommended." Someone had written underneath it in Sharpie, "Best plot twist of the year." I left it there, felt honest. I figured the last gust of wind had blown this circus off my land for good. You know how stories sometimes burn fast and bright, then flicker out like a 4th of July sparkler? Pretty, loud, but done before you can grab your second beer? That's what I expected. That the field would go back to being just dirt and sky, and Karen would crawl back into whatever manicured corner of suburbia she came from. But the universe, I've found, has a longer memory than people think. And it loves a good encore. It started with the fence. One crisp morning, maybe a month after the whole thing should have been yesterday's joke, I found a new laminated notice zip-tied to my property sign. Different color this time, neon orange, probably meant to look official, but still soaked in glitter. The message? Another cease and desist, this one accusing me of perpetuating ongoing psychological distress via community mythologizing. I read it 3 times just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. Apparently Karen, or someone in her orbit, was now mad that people remembered the story, that they were still telling it, that a bakery downtown had started selling a vanilla crumble cupcake called Karen's Cake Wreck, complete with edible mini helicopters on top, that my field had quietly become a folklore destination, that TikTok influencers were filming reenactments by the dozen. The notice was one last gasping attempt to erase a stain she spilled herself. And maybe a warning. She hadn't let it go, but I had. Mostly. I called Amy again because that's what I do now. Call Amy whenever Karen has another brainstorm fueled by delusion and a Pinterest board. Amy laughed so hard she dropped her phone. "What does she want now? For you to memory wipe the internet?" "She might," I said. "She seems to think I control the collective American sense of humor." We drafted a simple, polite reply, then filed it away knowing nothing would come of it. And for a while that seemed to be true. Days passed. Helicopters landed. Grass grew back. The wind, thank God, stayed calm. I started feeling like my old self again. Like maybe this whole thing would become something I'd only talk about when I needed to make a grandkid laugh or a dinner table go quiet. Until one Saturday, just after the morning flights wrapped up, a beat-up Subaru pulled into the gravel lot. A young man stepped out, pale, nervous, clutching a notebook. I watched him approach with that guarded wariness that comes from living through 3 decades of HOA meetings and one viral meltdown. "Are you the owner?" he asked. "That depends," I said. "Are you here to sue me? Fly something? Or get married illegally?" He cracked a smile, sheepish. "Neither. I'm a grad student, writing my thesis on internet myth-making. I wanted to ask if I could talk to you about the helicopter wedding. Maybe record something?" That stopped me. I looked at this kid, sincere, awkward, a little too caffeinated, and realized this damn story had done something I hadn't expected. It had stepped off the screen and started growing roots. Not just as a joke, but as a metaphor. For boundaries. For ego. For justice in a world where we don't often get to see it land with such dusty, spectacular precision. So I invited him up. We sat on the porch. I poured him black coffee he was too polite to admit he hated. And we talked. For hours. About land. About ownership. About how sometimes saying no can make a bigger impact than saying yes. About the strange honor of having your quiet life turned into legend by someone else's refusal to read a sign. When he left, he thanked me. Said he'd send a copy of the thesis when it was done. I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. A week later, I got another letter. This one handwritten, from Karen's ex-fiancé. Yeah. Him. The ghost from the edge of the disaster. The man who had hovered silently behind her while shrimp cocktails flew through the air and floral arches buckled like circus tents in a hurricane. His letter was short, respectful. He said he wanted to apologize for not stepping in that day. Said he'd believed her at first. Thought she had permission. Thought she was just overwhelmed. By the time I realized what was really happening, he wrote, I felt like I was inside a tornado that I had helped build. He left her 2 days later. He moved out, canceled the joint accounts, and returned the ring. I don't expect a response, he added. But I wanted you to know that the noise didn't drown out everything. I read that letter 3 times, then stuck it inside my toolbox, between the warranty for my leaf blower and an old picture of my dog. Not because it meant much, but because it meant something. That even in the middle of madness, someone found a compass. And then came the documentary crew. Yep, real cameras, real mics, a real producer with wild hair and a notebook full of insane questions. They weren't big time, just some indie outfit doing a series on property disputes that turned into viral legends. But they'd found the footage, the memes, the parody wedding invites. They wanted to film a closing chapter, as they called it. I agreed. On one condition, they get the story right. Not the glitz, not the clickbait, the truth. A woman showed up on my land without permission and tried to rewrite reality around her fantasy. And reality, powered by spinning blades and airspace leases, said no. So we filmed. I told it the way it happened, the way it felt. And when the episode finally aired months later, the response was different this time. Less laughing, more nodding, more I've been there. Messages started coming in. From ranchers, from veterans, from old men in small towns with stories that no one believed until they saw mine. One man wrote, I had a neighbor build a shed 3 feet over my property line. Everyone told me to let it go. I didn't. Thank you for reminding me I wasn't wrong. Another. I thought I was crazy for being mad when someone walked through my pasture without asking. Now I know I'm not alone. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It was about ownership, about space, about how people who've worked their land, paid their taxes, lived their quiet lives, deserve respect. And how rare it is these days for that respect to get enforced, not in courtrooms but in real time, with paperwork, with patience, with a little help from a Bell 407 at 1 p.m. sharp. In the end, Karen faded. As they all do. I heard she tried to pivot to influencer work. Healing after betrayal or some nonsense. Posted inspirational quotes over blurry selfies. But the internet never really forgets. Her face still floats under tags like #weddingfail and #helicopterdrama. Meanwhile, my field remains what it always was. Grass, dirt, sky. But now it carries echoes. Of laughter. Of wind. of a veil that caught the light just right as it flew like a ghost across the lawn. Sometimes I sit on the porch, coffee in hand, and watch the shadows stretch across the landing zone. A tourist might take a picture. A kid might ask if helicopters are loud. And every once in a while, someone will look at the sign, smirk, and whisper to themselves, "Not recommended, huh?" I just nod. Because they get it. They all do now. That stories matter. That lines in the dirt mean something. That if you stand your ground long enough, the world just might rally behind you. And if you're lucky, justice won't come with a gavel. It'll come with rotor blades and a blast of wind strong enough to carry the truth.